It's said that every great journey begins with a single step, and one to the west must be no exception. Black Myth Wukong pretty unapologetically begins in epic fashion with, I'll be honest, I don't have a great idea as to what's going on, except that I'm fighting gods and their armies alike as the titular monkey himself. And I may be getting a bit ahead of myself here, but one of my biggest complaints about this game as a whole is that we don't get more of Wukong's voice actor throughout, because I loved the performance they gave. Absolutely great characterization. Really fun. I wanted more, but 'twas not to be. Instead, we fought one dude with an army of our own. The section being scripted, it's sort of a show of things we'll have after we are stripped of our power to start the game proper. A tutorial of sorts with my monkey summons not costing any mana. A hell of a thing that we won't be benefiting from later. The game's performance is not perfect. Better than I'd heard, but the cloud effects hurt the frame rate, which sucks because I really didn't have anything to do between cooldowns except throw them out, run around, and admire the view, because if you haven't read the title, we're doing magic. Just magic, with a couple of really early exceptions, but we'll get to that in just a moment. They will both be brief and won't bleed into anything after. So, things got really stupid really quickly after beating him, and I want to be very clear, it was all stupid in the best kind of way. It was beyond over the top, and I loved every moment of it. Sun Wukong really said, if the gods are so powerful, then why don't they fight me? Then tried, and kind of successfully fist fought them? The kind of is the problem with the eventual mortal wounding, but you're seeing this. And it's sick as hell, what's not to love? Generations later, a monkey that just so happened to be a spitting image of him was tasked with setting out to find the 6 relics that make up the 6 senses of the great sage to bring him back. I think as a sort of reincarnation sort of deal, but I'll be honest, my understanding of the story does leave a lot to be desired. I was just having a bit too much fun monkeying around. The proper start, of course, includes no actual magic. Neat. We ran through a forest searching for solutions, and if you think there is one, well, there kind of is. There are a couple ways to take this intro. Arguably, this is where the run ends, but I feel like that's a boring answer. The game is shockingly massive, and I think losing out on the rest of the run due to just the start would be horrid. So, since I need to kill a couple of bosses and don't have any other tools that felt great to use, I made a bit of a bargain with chat. I'd only get to attack once per perfect dodge I executed. It leaves an afterimage sort of deal, is hard to execute, and is at least magic adjacent. So it did require at least a bit more skill than I probably really possess. Also, I'm fairly sure both my chat and mods would be really upset if I didn't at least mention it. Almost this whole run was done live over on Twitch. The only parts that weren't were farming. We tend to do these things over there these days, and I've been gently informed that they'd appreciate me mentioning it more publicly more often. Advertising what we do so people are better informed and can take part if they like. Also, in a weird twist, because my computer just up and decided that I didn't need any of my video files for this anymore, the only reason this video exists at all is because the VODs were still up after it randomly deleted well over a terabyte of footage. I swear, I can't escape technical issues to save my life. Computers fuel my greatest of passions and will one day be my undoing. Anyway, the first boss really is hardly worth mentioning, even by my standards. The second boss, though, now that's a fight worth mentioning, for a number of reasons. Compared to the last, he's fast. Very fast. Aggressive comparatively, and while he's not really that terrifying in the grand scheme of things, well, this may be a Souls-like in form and function, but it also demands relearning some things. It's, janky. Just a bit janky. If you want the TLDR version, this game is both great and horrible. The bosses are mostly really fun. It has some great sections for just exploring, and it has terrible ones. Places that all look the same, winding and confusing paths with countless invisible walls that both help and hinder. If you're wondering why I'm not showing more of the world between, well, we've got, I think, over 90 bosses to cover. Yeah, this is a mostly all boss run. Why mostly? Game bugged. It ain't perfect. Fun, but not perfect. Anyway, while I was terrible at finding openings for hitting him, he did fall eventually. For his defeat, we'd have the single most powerful tool in our arsenal, for a number of reasons. One being the transformations represent a lot of our damage. 2, the Red Tide's transformation is one of the best we're going to get for a really long time. Like, a really long time. I did go back and forth about using transformations at all. Like, is it truly magic to transform into something and then bonk it with a magic stick? For the purpose of this run, yes. It goes from making this run literally impossible to slightly better. I was initially worried it'd make the run too easy, but believe me, there was no risk of that. I similarly went back and forth between trying to fight the big little baby man optional boss that was kicking my teeth in, and the giant wolf creature that was also kicking my teeth in. I was not making a ton of headway in either. The thing about this game is, hitboxes aren't great. I was also still learning what did and didn't work. In the case of Red Tide over Paradise over here, I needed to use its special attack that is strange to control. Light attacks function how you'd expect, but do you lock in animations pretty badly. The yellow bar in the bottom left either represents my stamina in standard form or how long I have to be a wolf. Using moves drains that, but heavy ones do a lot more. In exchange, they do more damage. Go figure. By charging the meter on the right side until it's full, you unlock a special heavy in wolf form that can do one of three things. With back dodge then heavy, I do a charge forward. Side dodge heavy is a spin forward. Forward dodge then heavy is a downward slam that does the most damage, but is also one of the least reliable hitboxes I've ever seen. It has a large boom animation, but with all of the area of a postage stamp. I have such a love-hate relationship with that move. But with how slow the might meter recharges, as you can see on the bottom right hexagon, that you can't see moving, most of my time is just spent waiting. Waiting in a Souls-like with no way to defend myself. Can't block, can't attack, just dodge. A whole lot of dodging. And in case you've never seen me play a game before, I'm not good at these. This was stressful. I ended out with no healing and only one transformation away from victory for a while. The game more or less forced me to get good, and I'm not sure how to feel about it, but with it dead, my grand reward was that I got to move on. Pretty much nothing else. Also, a very minor gripe, but the language used in this game kinda sucks. Observe, this item that massively increases my maximum health. Try not to be too impressed, because genuinely that's one of the largest increases I'd seen in the whole game. That bar does go up, but leveling is far from traditional in this game, and while I love the skill point system they use, the stats. Now, this game does feature repeat bosses. Very much not many, but one such as a frog that comes in multiple elemental flavors. Unsurprisingly, this one is the easiest, and maybe it feels like a weird place to bring it up, but this game is beautiful. I'm sure it doesn't come through as well with the VOD compression, but it is gorgeous. I've played games that were pretty. Many. I've played ones that just didn't understand that being pretty isn't enough when it comes to visuals. I'm not sure how well this will or won't age, but when it comes to movement, the attacks, the ebb and flow of how it operates, this is a frog. I believe it. I feel it. It feels right seeing how the thing operates, and I love it. There are some lower points, but in general, the animations are gorgeous to match the environment. It also represents the first of many in our long line of spirits. They can be used as temporary transformations, but also provide some really powerful passives in normal play. Those passives probably aren't a huge deal, but I will take every little that I can. The next boss would make heavy use of teleportation, projectiles, poison, and even summons. That last part is definitely the reason I struggled a lot. It's demoralizing sometimes coming up so close and yet falling so far. Other times, it's galvanizing. This fight taught me early but painful lessons in how I needed to manage my resources. I used my wolf form to tank a lot of damage that I didn't feel I could avoid in any other way, but at the cost of finishing the fight. Losing health in your transformed state doesn't matter for the most part unless you lose all of it. You'll be forced back and you'll get a partial refund on the might left on the yellow gauge. A very partial, it's almost nothing. It's not nothing, but it's almost nothing. Meaning I'm not going back to square one, but I was back to waiting while nearly done. When your resources all run dry, what else do you do? While I stand by that I'm not good at these games, not by a long shot, I am often fairly stubborn, and sometimes that's all you need. After all, infinite monkeys striking keys on infinite keyboards will eventually write Shakespeare. Some of the projectiles exemplify a thing I've noticed in a lot of Souls-likes where if you dodge, you're screwed. If you can just run, just continue running, you'll be fine. Such is how is often best to deal with the snakes. Dodge once and the cooldown on dodges means you need to keep dodging to stand a chance, and you probably still don't. Which is neat. It's not, but strategery and all. Then, well, all good things must come to an end, and any feelings of progress, of hope, they'd have to go and vanish. There are plenty of fights in this that were a step up. This was the first that really hit home what kind of game we were playing. Like, really hit home. I was initially over the moon that I had some summons with my snake spirit, but they died really easily. I hate to say it, but they kinda suck. With transformations coming so slowly, a lot of bad attempts were best to just reset. Try again. Fact is, though, that you can't just teleport out of most boss fights. You don't lose anything on dying, and even when you can teleport to the nearest shrine, you can still be knocked out of the animation. When you die, you lose nothing and get sent back, so I ask you this. What in the actual hell is the difference between me instantly teleporting back and me being forced to either find a safe place to go back or waiting for the bosses that get weirdly non-aggressive when I no longer wish to continue to kill me? Answer. One of them saves me time as a player. It's literally the only difference. One of them shows me a lot more respect as a person. Let me give up in peace. Failing is already enough of a punishment, and I still have the boss run back afterwards. I improved my defenses through better armor. I upgraded my healing. Across a snake summon, 3 transformations, and around an hour and a half of attempts and prep, we finally beat the White-Clad Noble. This is first phase. Yeah, we were just getting started. I had to survive his fight long enough to make it through 2 phases of this nonsense. Phase 1 is capitalized by a lot of slow monologues. If you stand too close, he attacks. Too far away, he attacks. Mid-range. Just waits and talks to you for a bit. Do that. That's the correct one. Run as much of the clock as you can while waiting for cooldowns. It's imperative that you're dancing with him as little as possible. This fight is a nightmare. Genuinely, it's actually pretty good. I'm not nearly as big a fan of Phase 2, but the first is more or less everything I want in a boss at this stage. He's fast, aggressive, full of mix-up, distance closers, ranged attacks, AoEs. His moveset is both brutal and fun to learn. When you can learn him, he becomes easy, but not so much so that he's boring. The fact that he also gives you a moment to breathe? Really nice. Using some of what we learned and a lot of patience between transformations, we decided to be productive and bring an end to the reign of terror at the hands of the little big baby man. Which turned out to be a lot better than I thought. The armor set I was using gave 40 defense, the spirit had a passive bonus of 20 more. It also had a nice burst of guaranteed damage if I could hit, instead of the chance at something maybe with the snakes. After I spent a really long while farming, he's mobile enough that actually hitting him into his second phase was still painful. Doable, but difficult. Time-consuming. Still long bouts between us, with Phase 2 being less mobile. I thought if I could survive him, things would go differently. I thought so deeply wrong. See, below half health, he regenerates it. Rather quickly, too. By the time I could regenerate enough might to transform again, he'd already heal everything I could deal, even with the addition of my spirit. Fact of the matter is that we were staring at a DPS check that I simply couldn't beat with my current setup, so back we'd go to farming for the remainder of the stream into the later hours of the morning to prepare for the days to follow. We farmed all the way to 30, where we'd have access to a fairly minor but entirely vital damage buff that would allow something strictly necessary. With the ability to do 2 overhead slams in 1 transformation, we'd have more than enough at our disposal to burst him down from half to nothing. It was more or less the only way we were going to be able to handle it, and that we did. It may not have been an ideal way, but it was our way. And with hours of struggling behind me, I was able to return to my monkey business. Next up was a boss described as a bear, but I'm inclined to disagree. He makes a lot of use of teleportation, some swift movements, but he's not so bad. He was beaten in 2 transformations, and I saved my spirit for the Phase 2 that we suspected existed. See, spirits use ki. You get ki back by hitting enemies with normal melee attacks. I cannot do that, so I get to use them once per life, and that's it. Turns out he didn't exactly have a second phase, but we would be seeing him immediately after. See this health bar? See the massive amounts of damage I hadn't done? This represented more or less the most I could get out of a single transformation because he's heavily resistant to the only consistent form of damage I had at my disposal. Across hours of attempts and farming, I had to deal once more with the hitboxes of my strongest move. It's so precise I could run into part of his body in the air, and his feet being slightly tucked under him, I'd just miss because I was too far away, despite making direct contact. The Snake Dude's chest piece did luckily give me some passive healing over time when below half health, meaning I had some long-term sustainability. Being burst down was absolutely still a possibility, but it meant I could stay in the fight a hell of a lot longer otherwise. I just needed to not make 2 mistakes back to back, and I'd be maybe fine. We ended up leveling all the way to 45, where we'd get access to some, admittedly, less than stellar upgrades, and I'd use things like my Cloud Step to get just a bit more survivability. All to eke out a battle of attrition with the next to nothing left to my name to fall back on. For reference, we started at around an hour and 15 minutes into the stream, and the final attempt was around here. So, yeah, it could have gone better. At the end of each chapter comes a beautifully animated little side story that usually ties in one way or another. But the fact that we don't have even more of these is just criminal. Absolutely gorgeous. The next would begin by bringing me into a desert to fight many a creature. Luckily, the weather in-game got to perfectly match the weather in real life, with blistering sun and a broken AC for maximum immersion. I got to melt while writing this script. Right off the back, we'd be locked into combat with a frog in a pool of water. Why do I mention the fluid that floats by my feet? Well, my healing is better when standing in such substances. The set it comes from gains other bonuses, but I don't care about those. After multiple hellscapes though, dodges be damned, I was okay with just getting kicked around while my health regen handled the rest. Easy as. A double. Can't say I was excited to see them start popping up, but it's a thing that happens. Credit where it's due, the devs did a pretty good job of making sure the attacks you faced were either synced, making a fairly manageable experience, or simply made only one boss hostile at a time. Meaning you'd be switching focus a lot, but not just be overwhelmed in multi-boss boss fights. Also, this one lets you use the bigger guy to take out the relatively defensive points that the little dude sits on. Otherwise though, the ranged combatant is incredibly vulnerable. The bigger counterpart is a thing that I like to call real feckin' slow. So, you know, mostly a lot of waiting, but once done, he fell quickly. The following Goofy Goober has the mechanic where he gets stunned if he slams his face into a wall, which he does readily and often. If you can dodge his charges, which is not hard, then neither is he. It's both shockingly easy and genuinely surprising that he has but one phase to deal with. He spent so much time down that the multiple transformations might as well not have been. Things wouldn't be all good or bad, of course. Sometimes they'd rock. Why does anybody watch these? Anyway, while my damage was bad, so was its. Slow, weak, and slow. I did manage to find a rock in the arena that the boss just didn't really know how to deal with. Getting it stuck there wasn't perfectly consistent, but it meant I could just kind of sit and wait for my cooldown to finish up. The fight wasn't hard, nor was it engaging, but if it's not going to be fun, then being free is at least a nice trade, so you know. I got some arbitrary sliding down the sands. There's something just instinctively fun about it. If nothing else, it's a good way for you to make your ape escape. Also, at the end of the trip, I'd get something that I longed for some time now. A truly good use for my mana. I had the ability to convert it into pure monkey power, and also friendship. To clarify, mana doesn't regenerate. I won't have a way of recovering it in combat for a while. Also, their AI isn't incredible, but this boss can heal to full once it hits half health. Only needed it once for me during my successful attempt, otherwise throws frame rate killing minions at ya. Beyond that, functions pretty similarly to the other little big baby man. It was okay. While handling some semi-secret side bosses though, I of course had to go kill a Durgan. And you could say me hitting the weak point on its back for a ton of extra damage was a long shot. Look, I said we were going to be beating the game with magic. I made no promises of the quality of jokes along the way. For better or worse, a lot of fights did more or less boil down to the age-old adage, I kinda had to simply get good. I had to actively avoid anything and everything they had to throw at me for long periods of time while unable to do anything else. Not perfectly, but well enough. This one did come with some luck, as knocking it down at just the right time meant cutting the duration of the fight dramatically. Conversely though, this would of course mean a failure to do so would result in a really long and brutal fight. A sort of recurring theme, if an uncommon one. The next up on the docket was pretty slow with a jump rope gimmick that doesn't play nicely with your cooldown between either jumps or dodges. Rocks though, rocks work a treat, as long as you keep your foe from them. The big ugly bugger could destroy them with most of its attacks, but leaving them standing would be the gorilla-last mistake they'd ever make. Now, of course, not all bosses are created equal. Some of our best damage comes off of cooldowns. We referred to these in terms of cycles. Monkey summons could come back sooner than transform, but not by a lot. We'd often measure bosses roughly by how many cycles of cooldowns it took to beat them. Had I played better, this was a one cycle. Just throw summons, my spirit, and transform at it properly, and it'd die. I didn't, but that damage is nothing to sneeze at. Genuinely easy. Not even like my warped perception of it just didn't have enough health to be a threat. Speaking of, though, we did have a little boss to mop up along the way. There weren't a ton, but the one-cycle bosses certainly went, and this was absolutely one. Just imagine how easy this game would be if I could swing the bonk stick. When it comes to the Tiger Vanguard, though, I genuinely wish I had more to say. More time to say it. This fight, I think, is one of my favorites for the game as a whole. He says he's gonna do something, and then just does it. He says he's gonna stab you? That sword is a-comin'. His moves are explosive, the timing is fun, and feels both dangerous and natural to play around. He's all around a delight of a boss. He can harden to deflect some things, then often teleport a bit to keep you on your toes, but he's great. We'll just kind of meander across the arena sometimes instead of closing distances, but that's a common thing among enemies. Most of the ones in the open world can't keep pace with you at all. But all the same, love this fight. It's not complicated, and complicated does not mean fun. It's simple, and I enjoy it for that. I'm glad they didn't bloat it with stuff because they were onto something here. I fought a boss that took longer to find than it did to kill with its one cycle. After was one that doesn't fight back. The little rocklings will, but running around makes them easier to avoid, and they get caught in AoEs from time to time. So clearing them out slowly while chipping at her wasn't the worst. Not the best, but most of the rock-based fights in this game are kinda terrible. Case in point, I'm not sure if this even counts as a boss, but it was here. Emphasis on was. And that rock from earlier that stopped a boss? Also a boss. Also a rock. Running away from it was super viable because it has the exact same problem as the last thing I fought in this arena. It's not interesting, nor fun, but it certainly is a fight that took a couple of attempts because I'm bad at games and got really sloppy. I blame boredom. Now, I'd been at it for a while, trying really hard to find and kill bosses to make forward progress in this game, and I was at it long enough, and my chat is cool enough that they were actively trying to get me to do crazy things like take care of my general health and safety. Noble goals. I genuinely love this community and how wholesome everyone is. But I really wanted to progress. The world, though, had other plans. Things were apparently falling apart, with the frames dropping incredibly fast and hard. I couldn't tell what the boss was doing, and my whole computer crashed. We experienced a few crashes, but this was the only one to end an entire day. Why did I quit after that round? Well, the following day started with around 45 minutes of the bastard killing me and my frame rate, slowly waiting for the game to stabilize while trying to learn his moveset. While I didn't love it, I'm not sure just how much of that was me hating the fact that he didn't feel steady. I just couldn't trust him. Some of his moves felt very... You have to guess what's going to hit you. You have to hope the frame rate isn't going to screw with the timing. Otherwise, I took most of his health in one cycle. He's not hard per se, just rubbish. Am I bitter because he's mobile and his hitboxes are weird with some things also hitting you from off screen? Maybe. Is he dead now? Yeah. We then fought a boar. It certainly is a fight that exists. We discovered much earlier on our damage scales with things like weapon damage, so upgrades to that are great. Same I think can be said for monkeys, so some buffs that may or may not seem useful very much are. Some less so. It's weird, hard to explain. The long and short of it, we got a mask for fighting this guy that gives a buff for drinking from our gourd. Our gourd also does that. We got at least a handful of some things that could outright buff what we could do. Though I'm not sure some of those things tracked into transformations. Those in conjunction with a spirit that buffs our damage and gives us an incredibly powerful attack with a horrible hitbox and less health overall, we were able to one-cycle the Tiger Vanguard. Pretty sure we're looking at a time travel sort of situation. We then had to fight a big old bug. Not ideal with some of them hitboxes. Then it turns out the end boss for the chapter shows up in this fight to help out. If by help out I were to mean do literally everything for me. It was genuinely really nice seeing the hard carry because this was going to be a nightmare otherwise. Also for the record, I'm not the one doing the non-magic damage. It doesn't count. The end boss of the chapter was, of course, our rat friend. Fast, windy, and loved magic weapons. Thing is, for beating the bug, a thing that the rat did for me, I have an item that gives me a defensive buff and also removes the wind powers of the rat. It's almost like it wanted to reward me for doing side content by letting me kinda skip some of his gimmicks. Almost like. Overall, genuinely a fun fight, some nice projectiles, big AoEs, and in so many words, the timing of its moves felt good. Well telegraphed, and just, don't get hit by the weapons that come out of the ground. Not super hard, but it did take me a bit to get down. I want to emphasize I'm not great at this game. This was not a quick run. You're seeing the successful attempts because I at least try to show a value of your time, unlike my own. And unlike this game sometimes, holy hell. We met some dumb-looking monkey boss. It was just a hop, skip, and a quick one cycle from defeat. Not death, because it ran, but the monkey's paws apparently never rest. Now, while I often like to see snow maps, seeing this dragon was less okay. Starting with this grab. I can't stand this grab. I'm not good, not by any means, but this feels wrong. For the most part, dodges in this game feel great. There were many times where I was just bad and got hit, but the dragon's grab attack feels as though you need to dodge the slow motion that you get before it grabs you, rather than when it tries to make contact. So if you dodge it like you're going to avoid every other attack in the game, then you're dodging far too late. Is that actually the case? No idea. Hard to tell. What I can tell you is that something about the timing feels incredibly off, and I hate it. Alternatively, dude's flying. In a melee game. My buddies? Ground. Me? Ground. Transform? Ground. Is there a robust aerial combat system I never got to try? Maybe. If there's maybe just something I'm not aware of there, then fair enough. I know some stances have at least something they can do, but otherwise you have a melee-centric game with an enemy that runs from you and rarely gives you a chance to actually hit it. I genuinely hated this fight. It wasn't fun. It didn't feel fair. It may absolutely have been my fault. I don't know. This was my first and only playthrough, but all in all, this thing felt bad. So given that I can barely chip at its health except for when it very briefly lands, how the hell was I going to deal with a fight that could also kill me at ludicrous speeds? Simple. I just needed to turn a seemingly endless fight into a one cycle. Everything needed to be nearly flawless. I needed to watch specifically for its forward attack here, which would be followed by a tail slam. I drank from my gourd that gave me a damage bonus, gave me a buff for my mask, and followed up with a blast for my spirit. There's some downtime after summoning before they're active, so I summoned first, then activated my anti-wind item. It doesn't do much here, but it does just enough damage to push it over the knockdown threshold. I then used Immobilize with points directed into that, as well as an armor that gives an additional damage bonus for using Immobilize. All combined, all that I had left in the barrel was to throw a full transformation of the wriggling mass, and after a lot of testing, several attempts of setup, the dragon went down. Dreadful little creature, but a dreadful dead little creature now. How are you expected to do this? I'm unsure. Now, right after, I found myself in a prison. A place where everything looks the same, all the cells look the same, the twists, the turns, it's all always a different day, but the simian story. Also, at seemingly random, there's an effect that removes my ability to transform, drains my max health, and then gives me a really bad screen effect for those prone to motion sickness. Gonna try to avoid showing it as much as possible, but it can also trigger in the middle of a side boss battle with no real indication as to when it goes off. There may be a way that I don't personally know. I either find it a horrendous failing of my own observation or just a failing of the game to communicate. If I can't dodge it, I can't nullify it, and I just have to accept the new reality. A screen blur and sound just before isn't a warning, it's just telling me that my time is up. Ended up finishing this fight with a teleporting laser bastard out with more summons during the I can't use my stuff period of the fight that activates whenever. Mechanics got me going apeshit. What came next was the source of that effect, and would use that technique throughout the fight. Big deer-looking thing with an absolutely massive health pool. Conveniently enough, you can deal significantly more damage by simply hitting it in the super monkey ball, by doing things that I can't. So instead, most of the damage I dealt was through spacing transformation attacks to inflict burn wherever I could, through also not being able to transform at all periodically. I sacrificed a fair bit of defense purely for healing over time, because if it's not abundantly clear, this was going to be an endurance match. More specifically, we spent around half an hour straight fighting this thing. How, you may ask? How would you possibly combat such a creature? Well, standing a bit behind it made it de-aggro for the most part, so most of its hard to avoid attacks were off the table. I just had to avoid the easy ones, and also its most deadly attack, which sucked, but it could have been a lot worse. At the very least, it used these things infrequently. Though granted, that did mean I still needed to pay constant attention to the fight to not just lose. Being harassed once more by the orangutan, I was able to burst the thing down in a one cycle, ignoring most of its mechanics. Cyan Long, more like Cyan really simple moveset despite dealing an absolute ton of damage. Okay, cut me some slack. I was giving this run my best, but it was taking a lot out of me. Still is. This was a lot. Like the very next fight, for instance. This boss was a woman, but she was also a dragon. Dragon woman. This boss! Okay, she mostly uses projectiles. It causes a lot of flashing lights in phase 2, so just assume staying away from her is really effective. We streamed this, and I ain't hurting people with it if I can help it. Wasn't that bad, except visually. Like, it was cool, but it was bad. So we freed my pig friend from captivity, as one does. Turtle! This boss in particular was supposed to be easy, because it unlocks basically Firelink, which is neat, and coincidentally, I was specifically requesting a Firelink area for helpful NPCs around the time that I did this. So again, that was nice. Weird that it's this late and probably missable, especially because you also have to go do a quest for him. And yes, I'm skipping covering the quest. Do you see the runtime? Now, was it necessary to face every boss I could find? Probably not. Was it a matter of stubbornness and desperation? Maybe. I fought a buff tiger for a lot longer than was likely necessary. My summons do some decent damage, but he actively blocks them, which buffs his offense by a lot for reasons. He moves around a ton, which makes him hard to hit. His moves are hard to predict, devastating, and I sort of have a love-hate relationship with him. He also suffers pretty greatly in terms of bosses that just kill my frames at random, meaning dodging is a little inconsistent. It's difficult when he works, and it's a lot more so when he doesn't. Surviving in his arena is painfully hard. His grab attack has almost no tell. He shows up and grabs everything around him. If you don't dodge, you're screwed. The problem is, the animation is almost the same as when he shows up and swings a sword, and if you dodge early, you're screwed. And while that feels really bad from the perspective of me, a player who's really bad at reacting, I prefer to play proactively for a reason of slow reaction times, like statistically below average, I have checked. So the move felt awful to play around, not seeing him until it was too late, made it hard to formulate a response, and to make it abundantly clear, I'm aware that it's a me issue. That doesn't mean I have to like it. If that wasn't bad enough, though, he forces you out of your transformation when his health gets too low, and you would otherwise win the encounter, so not noticing this right away, I struck him multiple times with my stick. I force closed the game despite being terrified of doing something dumb like corrupting my save, but upon rebooting the game, I was able to pick back up where I left off, undoing a ludicrous amount of time and attempts. All because he cheated. Relaunching it meant the frame rate had to restabilize, the fight took forever in general, because remember, cooldowns are slow, and there's not a good way to fix that. Also, when I managed to beat him again, he hit me after the match was over because he's a petty jerkbag, a cheater, and a sore loser. I got robbed of a win, hit with unfair tactics, and also his sword when he'd already lost. No respect left for this buff cat person. Also, thank you, sir, for giving me access to armor upgrades. For the record, beating him is not required for set upgrades. I just wanted to. I then fought a flying boss by the side of a pig. Key note here, though, the boss has this technique called landing sometimes. That one was my favorite move. Take note, Rathlos, you bastard. Why are you like that in every game? Why can't you be more like Rathian? She's the better fight and you know it. She's the better monster and she was designed first, you fool. I don't care if you're the flagship of the series, everyone knows Dodogama is better than you. And you live in constant fear of the world acknowledging how far design has come in the years that have provided us creations greater than you could ever hope to be with your weird-ass iterations. And yes, despite that, I'm excited to fight you again in Wilds. I want it so badly! Next I fought what I hope is the result of a complete lack of localization. I can't stress enough, localization and translation are not the same thing. You can't just convert things one-to-one and expect them to go off without a hitch. There are some things that just culturally will not translate nicely, and this is... no. Also, I was using a different transformation form of the blacksmith, and it wasn't good. Fun to mix it up for a moment, but Red Tides stands superior. Frog! Along my path, I found many a thing. Most importantly, a new drink. Now my gourd gives me a tiny bit of mana, which is better than none. A lot better. Also, another boss. Super easy. It didn't really have a good answer for enemies that don't want to hug it. It thought it could make a monkey out of me, but it was mistaken. But also, realistically, it was getting really late. Like, really late, and it was setting in just how much of the game was left. How much time we'd already devoted to streaming. Chat wanted me to sleep for my physical health. I wanted to finish the run for my mental health, but, well, I present to you the end result of day 3. Starting out the next day, there's always at least a fair bit on my mind, but knowing fully well how much I had left to do was disheartening, to say the least. Keeping to any sort of schedule with these is an exercise in madness and is genuinely harder than any run I've ever done. Believe it or not, the runs themselves are always some of the easiest parts of what I do. So knowing I wasn't even kind of approaching the checkered flag, that's scary. But there's no way forward quite like just going forward. We started out by fighting, I hope, an error. Please let this be a mistake. Dude even had a phase 2. Neither phase was impressive, but splitting my resources sucks, and being forced out of transformations via cutscenes that also don't refund the time I lost sucks. I also found this thing. I'd feel bad about one-cycling it, but I honestly forgot it existed until going through the footage. The following one was weirdly dangerous. Only 2 cycles, but being slowed sucks, and the damage it deals is nothing to sneeze at if you hypothetically got into the headspace of not respecting some bosses enough, but I'd never make that mistake, excluding all of the times I did exactly that. Shortly after, we went and killed a murderer, specifically of a fox spirit. Long story, but the dude had the audacity to make reading painful, attacked me with countless paper cuts like I needed to earn my nerd card. You thought me a buffoon, but I'm much closer to a baboon. I reject your reality and substitute it with monkey! I'm gonna level with you, bud. Seeing how quickly you die, how little you got to do, and just how many bosses are mucking about, I'm not even surprised that I forgot you were here, so, another boss for the pile? I then found an old man who's both really tall and really weak. It's a good thing that this one-cycle boss is definitely this easy and has nothing else in store. Nope. Not a single other thing to throw at me, and I'm sure I'm gonna go about my merry way just dandy after this. Because reasons, I got pulled into... Wait a minute, this isn't a barrel of monkeys, this is a bag! Well, I guess I should deal with the only other one present. Really mobile fella. Not as hard to pin down though as you might think. It does help a lot that we have a pig present to assist. Also, losing this fight means coming back here. Mercifully, you don't have to redo the first phase, just this. And it wasn't the worst, but I was lucky to have that in place. Needed it more times than I really should have. The game does forcibly turn you into the boss after, but very temporarily. It does want you to start the next phase that way, but I didn't like the sound of that. Really, it was probably within the vague rules that we've set out, but still. You can simply die and restart, which will leave you right next to the third phase fight. Again, sweet mercy, but my summons did basically nothing in this fight. The boss can absolutely thrash my health bar, meaning heal over time from a chest piece was less than meaningful. The AoEs and whatnot were painful to avoid and predict, specifically for me. I'm not sure why, but I kept running face first into lightning like a goober. Took me ages to realize that I could simply jump out of the lightning circles and didn't need to spot dodge everything. But I got some mileage out of my own healing rings for the first time in the run. I can place it on the ground to get health, and not a lot else in exchange for mana. Almost never worth it because I need that for monkeys, and more often than not, they're far more worth a barrel of laughs. Why do they suck here? Why were transformations only sometimes usable? Because the boss can just choose to be immune to damage for a while. Not sure how that does or doesn't operate in normal fight terms, but it means my monkeys were a waste of mana, my transformations were a waste of time during it, and everything came to a screeching halt in a really long matchup. Gotta say, not a huge fan. Weirdly, while doubling back, I did have a really similar experience with a side boss. It's not hard, it just stalls a lot with big, I'ma hit you with rings a lot energy, and also I'ma become basically unhittable every time you use most of your mana bringing in backup because of course, while also crossing over to the other side of the arena. so you have to chase them, wasting time on transformations. In the next area, we were back to one cycling. I'm going to try to avoid showing certain things here, though, because most of the chapter is very spider-heavy. Like, very spider-heavy. As such, I already skipped showing the first mandatory boss here, which was also a one cycle. Use your imagination. There was also a centipede side boss that has a lot of little minions for an attack, but is otherwise just very nearly a one cycle with too many legs. Credit where it's due, some of the boss designs are really cool, arguably haunting, really weird. This one in particular was a pain in the everything to hit, but it's cool at least. No, I'm not showing the rest of this one, even if it's the easiest part of the fight. Now, while a rather important boss will be getting the old skipperoo, this guy won't be. He's quick, but not massively so. He does a lot of damage, but not in single hits. You're only truly in trouble if you take repeated shots, like I admittedly did often. He's very reminiscent of the dragon boss on the turtleback right before the bigger dragon boss, also on the turtleback. Good job explaining, me. Thank you, me. Worked very hard on it. I was being sarcastic, me. I know you were, me. I chose to approach your sarcasm with an earnest rebuttal to encourage you to speak your mind. You've got a problem, you say it to your own face. Me? A problem? You're goddamn right I got a problem. It's almost 6 in the morning and you're sitting at your computer eating cookies instead of sleeping. Oh. Shit. It says I'm recording this now between 2 and 3 in the morning. There are 3 versions of me here, and only 2 of those have cookies. 6 a.m. me was a thieving dick. Where's my share, me? I have things to answer for! Now, delving into a boss fight that was way too far from the nearest shrine, it was also the hardest frog fight for me. Was it because I couldn't get a feel for the timing? Was it because my armor was lagging behind in terms of upgrades? Was it just the latent frog power? I don't know. The poison certainly didn't help, but the thing absolutely slapped me around a few times before I bested it. Now, Pigsy, I'm not here to judge you for getting mind controlled. Frankly, it can happen to the best of us. No judgment here. I'm just disappointed in you. Of everyone in my journey, you really went and made yourself a one-cycle scenario? My dude. Weak sauce. Okay, I get that you wanted a second shot at it. I can respect that. You did manage to improve quite a bit in a short time. You went from being a one cycle to having an arena that I swear is messing with my ability to move and is frankly obnoxious. You should cut that out. But otherwise, you're more threatening. Just as long as you don't do something terrible like go into a completely different phase when your health hits half, wasting anything active at that time, and or potentially just being a really bothersome fight that I then have to get to every time I fail so I can practice in this pit of hell. That'd be terrible. Oh, fuck! So I came close to beating him multiple times, only to come up short. I struggled a lot with things like a move where he becomes a rhino and throws more rhinos at you, and him just kind of turning around does most of my health and damage while placing me firmly face first in the muck. He's not hard, but he is gross and faster than he looks. Mostly because moving here feels inconsistent. I couldn't tell if I was having controller issues, if I was interacting with mechanics, or there was no issue at all and I was just gaslighting myself into thinking that it was worse than it really was. And genuinely, that's one of the worst places to be. Is it me? Did I cause this issue? Am I once again the architect of my own misery? Was my therapist right? I don't have one of those. I can't afford a therapist. And this is your reminder that therapy is great and statistically has been proven more often than not to do no harm or improve your daily life. If you can swing it, you should seek help. Therapists aren't there just to help people that are struggling immensely. Sometimes it's really just nice to have a professional set of eyes on your life to point out things that you wouldn't have noticed on your own. Come up with strategies for tackling things that just make things easier. They can help to improve your relationships with loved ones, with work, hobbies, you name it. Therapists are professionally in your corner to help you get the most out of life, which is rad as hell as a service that you should look into if it's available in your circumstances. Not all of us can, so if nothing else, do it for us. You're already feeling great on your own? That's cool. Imagine how much better you could be doing with help. Do it, coward. Reach for the best in life because you deserve it. Also, normalizing seeking help is rad because stigma surrounding self-betterment is cringe. Fight me. I'll die on this hill. Now, there's a spider boss. It's a really comfy 2-cycle, except for the fact that seeing it is uncomfy. I'm not going to say specifics, but you do need to run after. And I was struggling a lot with it just casually. Nothing about it required abnormal play, I don't think. I kept failing doing things completely normally, so fun fact, transforming before you start taking damage in that section gives you a second health bar to tank the encounter, and also infinite stamina. Would recommend. Also, there's this guy who starts out with a small army defending him. Plenty easy to pick off, and then he's a pushover. You could definitely focus him, but I did not. Then there's this guy. Multiple appearances, multiple phases in both. His first one, he literally doesn't move, but it comes with some gross imagery, then he's a pushover. Then you fight him here, and he's a pushover. So he goes into this super secret mega power I'ma beat you now phase where he has this crazy technique called dying. Credit where it's due, I never saw it coming. He pulled it out of nowhere, hit the ground, and I just don't have a response. I was doing some investigating around the secret area of the place, and the locals didn't seem all that friendly. I did try fighting the final boss of the chapter, but we'll get to that, because for better or worse, that marked the end of real progress we made that session. We started out the next day by circling back to deal with who and or whatever this is. Perks of playing a game on release. Despite being a fire-based boss, that would give me a fire transformation and also a fire damage buffing skill. Fire was shockingly effective, taking less than a cycle to beat. This was instrumental in a number of ways. One being more damage, and another being faster farming. I also did a lot of farming off camera because I didn't want to subject more people to that. There was almost definitely more than enough on stream. After, we went to fight a boss that was 2 phases, but each was a cycle. Even waiting for my cooldowns wasn't bad, because this particular boss suffered from this little thing called being just some guy. It's such a non-boss that it's kinda nuts. I fought completely normal enemies in this very game that were more threatening. Then came this fight of all fights. The big goat-looking thing is the real boss. The scorpion is in fact the same one I tried to kill the day before, and also for a while today, but he shows up to help fight the Duskvale. Problem is a fewfold. One, he only shows up the one time because he dies here and stays dead in every arena. And yes, I'm counting this as killing the scorpion. I did not bonk him, and he is dead. That's close enough in my book, and I'm not replaying the whole game to bring him back to life. 2, the Duskvale takes very little damage from anything, and yes, everything that I threw at him. Trust me, we tried a lot of things. Phase 1 was easy, but tedious. The successful attempt at the boss, I went through 3 transformations, and it isn't that hard in the grand scheme of things, just really friggin' long, and I, of course, had to do that just to get to the second phase to begin learning the more complex moveset. It's still not incredibly hard, but the kill would require more or less all of my mana, and 4 transformations for the second phase. You may notice that I'm not using Red Tides, because Red Tides has the same odds of hitting things that I do of successfully dodging anything. It might happen, who's to say? Also, while it does better damage, the Fire Rat isn't exactly a slouch. Mostly on account of the burn damage it dealt being a massive amount of what we were doing with either, and the Rat is arguably better for inflicting it with its flamethrower breath. As for the rest of our build, I put the health regen armor back on, with the addition of all of my curios being dedicated to damage reduction, with the additional bonus of my spirit giving a slow but incredibly meaningful health regen. Basically, we got an endurance fight, so we built for one. We built really hard into endurance above all else. And how should my efforts be rewarded? What boons should I receive? A needle. And no, I didn't forget about this boss, or at least in terms of killing it. The only thing I actually remember is that it heals itself, but didn't have enough health to survive being focused down when shifting gears just a touch. Now, this next section comes with some very centipede-y sort of visuals. I can't really justify skipping this one, so here's a timestamp if the design is just too gross. I get it, no judgment here. There do be a lot of legs. Alternatively, I'll let you know when it's gone. Just do what's most comfy for you. So, last chance if you hate the visual of large insects. Here we go. The final boss for the chapter, you get spider companions in your first attempt, and all subsequent attempts he just has some health missing instead. Which is nice, I guess, but there are a few qualms I have with it all the same. One of the biggest is his animations. His movement is very wiggly, and while this really works to convey just how gross he is, and how much I'd love to have a massive boot right now, I swear my brain can't differentiate between him just moving and him pulling out one of these. His grab may not be lethal, but the damage feels damn near unavoidable. I got hit by it almost every time he used it because my brain says he's just going to start walking again, and joke's on me, he's doing far more than walking. Also, because he's so tall and his body is held so high off the ground, with legs spread so wide, a lot of my attacks are directed right where they can't physically hit him due to the hitboxes in this game in conjunction with a sometimes terrible lock-on. If your answer to counter this is to disable what is arguably a pivotal accessibility feature for a lot of players to circumvent what I would argue is at the very least a mildly bad little intersection between design choices, then I have several questions, but most importantly, why? why is this the way that it is? I either get to fight my camera to see the wiggly bastard, or I get to fight my camera to hit him. Either way, it just feels bad. There are even several bosses within the game that have more dynamic lock-ons to support more or less exactly these sorts of issues. The devs have proven they have the solution. Please, either fix it, or even better, just slightly increase the size of Red Tide's hitboxes. I beg of you. Most of the way through the fight, after 4 transformations though, trying to specifically target his side, he pulls out phase 2 where you can't transform at all. He becomes a lot more aggressive, and the monkeys just don't do a ton, especially with how much damage his new moves were dealing. Gotta say, this threw a monkey wrench in my plans. Now, why did we spend so long farming and doing side content? Because the needle that we got completely nullifies the gimmicks around that phase, making him go straight from the hardest possible boss for the run to incredibly doable. For the record, I had no idea the needle did that until I saw it in action. I was shocked and in awe. It was all that I needed and more. Also, it does a nice bit of damage after this, so I was just all around happy to have it. With the centipede officially gone, all ye who loathe them may return. Into the inevitable volcano chapter, we started off on a strong note with a boss that's almost entirely indistinguishable from any other random enemy. Took 2 cycles, but it doesn't have boss vibes, it's just kinda here. Very much the same with this enemy here. It's a more literal wall than I'm used to seeing, but ironically does a lot less to stop me. Something about it doing almost nothing to actually attack me was rather unconvincing. It's resistant to elemental things, but this isn't the only one like this. Will Champan see how this works out for them? I know someone somewhere is probably hearing this and thinking, the I forgot this was a boss joke. I see you using it yet again to refer to bosses that were incredibly easy and didn't even vaguely classify as noteworthy. You were a fool and a charlatan, a veritable bozo, for I have seen through your ploy, you rapscallion. I witness your jest, and I reject it, for comedy is objective and you are wrong. And to this I say, I'm not joking, not even slightly. There's so many bosses, there's so many friggin' bosses, I don't even remember this. Clearly I killed it, but I don't remember doing that. It's surreal. Oh no, another cart. Are you gonna pose the challenge? Nah, I didn't think so. Now, in terms of boss design, I'm not saying these two are good. They're not. The rolling head can and will deal damage barely moving, meaning there's not really a good way to read it. The area denial is more annoying than anything else. The floating head is basically only hittable after a couple of attacks that leave it motionless on the ground. The damage isn't there to be threatening, but the fight isn't really tight enough to justify ramping it up. To put a finer point on it, I think this is a bad boss fight, but I love their non-mechanical designs. Visually, this is just cool. Maybe a little dumb, weird, and totally unapologetic. Do I want to fight them? No. Am I glad they're here? Absolutely. Monsters, clothes, music, storytelling, just art doesn't have to fit my culture or general understandings of the world. And sometimes I really like when they don't. Moments like this little arena where I'm supposed to save a talking fox from 2 sentient hostile heads are genuinely great. I then fought a couple of bosses that were more or less the definition of fine, but they swap between which one is physically in play via teleportation, one is more melee oriented, the other is ranged. That's kind of it. The game did decide almost randomly to remind us of how beautiful it is, with a really obvious, but I think still fun and pleasant yin and yang motif. Not a clue what the associated statuses do, though. There are sections we needed to clear out a bunch of ads that got spawned in before the fight could continue, which sucked a bit. There also was apparently a second phase up ahead to deal with. Juratotus from Monster Hunter! You weren't even fun in the games that you were from! Get out of here! Phase 1 being so ranged-based, it was slow but easy as all get out. The second is so floppy. It's always running around, wasting my time, wriggling the way out of attacks. It's not even difficult, it's just slow. And wet. I swear, if we get this stupid fish back in Wilds, I'm not gonna do anything about it, but Capcom will collectively have to live their lives knowing that they made my day worse. I just want you to know, Capcom, you will have made me sad, and you will have to live with that. Now this cart kinda moves, it does things, crazy. It also gave me a buddy to fight alongside me, so it mostly attacked an NPC, but progress is progress. Now, between tree powers and lava, you'd think fighting a rock monster might be hard. It isn't. The early game gave me a thing that makes me immune to lava, not the burn status effect, curiously. Enemies can still proc what lava can't, somehow, and I mean, Red Tides is still great, I'm too lazy to swap it, so... Oh yeah. Why are there so many? There's a ball! It's finally a Souls-like! We have a ball section! Call DK, we found his barrel! Didn't I already kill you? Like several chapters ago? Why are there so many stone enemies in this game? They're ironically not hard, nor are they fun. Where's the irony in them not being fun? Simple. Outside of this game, when they're not rocking, they're rolling. Oh dang. A cart that's finally aggressive enough to be a real threat. Capable of genuine damage output, chasing the player down and whatnot. It's a good thing that the boss doesn't do anything dumb, like get locked into attacking you at a range if you're too far away, with arguably the worst ranged attack this side of the mountain with no variety or real means to hit you, letting you recover cooldowns, health over time, whatever the player would like, really. That would make this fight painfully easy if you're willing to wait long enough between attacking it. It's a good thing. Big fire frog? More like big dumb. Got him. You know what else is nice? Continuity. The ball from earlier was actually two people that have two shield halves that make a sphere-like thing, but the shields aren't even close to the scale of the ball that they ran me over with earlier. I don't care if this is petty or easily explainable via magic within the setting. You think I'm going to focus on the logistics of how they're able to even lift those massive metal things? Because I will! We're multi-track tangenting here. There is no way in hell they'd be able to stand up that straight without themselves being literally massive. They would not be able to counteract the weight of them, even ignoring the logistics of outputting that much force via incredibly limited and relatively small muscles. This is ridiculous. They're clearly only this small to cover up the fact they shouldn't be able to lift them. It is a conspiracy. They shrink them when you're not looking so they can hide their lies. I'm onto you, game. I see your nonsense. Also, these two bosses hate each other, but are directly tied to one another within the lore. Just break up. It's not worth it. Nobody's happy with this arrangement. And ending bad relationships is hard, but no relationship is still better than a bad one. Be it platonic or otherwise, you owe it to each other and yourselves to be honest. The sooner you separate, the closer you can begin the healing process and reach a point in your life where you can truly be happy. Bad matches are bad matches. Love yourself enough to know when enough is enough and seek better. And I swear, if either of you say you're staying together for the kids, I'm coming back here to kill you both again. It is worse for everyone, I promise. And then found a little dude who was being kind of a dick about a lot of stuff. Yes, him using fire meant bad things for me being able to actually hurt him. Yes, him being mobile meant bad things for me hitting him. No, I didn't swap off my fire transformation that I got at the start of the run. No, he's not that aggressive, so yes, this phase of the fight was pretty slow but easy. And make no mistake, you are looking at the big bad of this section of the game. Truth be told, while some of his kit was fun to play around, the rest was very forgettable. Did I remember this giant flamethrower? Not at all. I did kind of remember his dashing around moves, though. Like, okay, he's gonna do a lot of moves that both reposition to discombobulate me while also overwhelming my senses. I've got to figure out which moves are actual threats rather than him messing around. Could be fun stuff, but without anything genuinely dangerous, he just doesn't register as scary. Now, the second phase. If he did more to stay near me, then he'd be onto something. His massive and quick attacks that feel both fun and fair to dodge, those are great. He just also, more often than not, spends an age and a half walking at you. He has ranged attacks, but they're not threatening enough to matter, so just walking a lot. Great way to waste time during cooldowns. Genuinely, this fight is a lot of fun when you're up in his face, and yes, I'm very aware the game is built around that. I guess I just expected him to be better at making that happen regardless of my wishes. Make no mistake, the fight still took me several attempts, and I'm not good at it, but it was genuinely a lot of fun. There were a lot of sections that were basically just breathers, but those moments when things came to life, loved them. Now, the first boss of the final chapter, fast, aggressive, loves to just leave when I activate abilities, crazy strong damage. One of the only upsides to the fight is knowing it mostly slows down during its last phase, during the firing thing. It does more damage during, sure, but I knew that after a lot of attempts and saved things like mana to burn to speed through it when the monkeys could also be at their most effective. Otherwise, the tells it had were odd and messed with my head a lot. Hard to nail down. This technically was also a boss that you would only need to fight a little bit of in a previous chapter, but I would like to counter with my game glitched. I couldn't find it. I checked all the things for the quest necessary. I simply couldn't, and I don't feel bad about missing it, especially since I just did the actual fight. But importantly, that would spell an end for the day. There were a couple of different things about day 6. For one, I'd just done 5 days of playing the same game for probably an unhealthy number of hours without any real interruptions. My previous record for a run duration, I think, was somewhere in the mid-50s, but we were already past that with a full chapter ahead. To say I was tired would be an understatement. Was this the hardest run I've done? Nah. Was it the most involved or complex? Not even close. Was it by far the longest and most strenuous? Abso-friggin-lutely. But all the same, I was determined. If I could help it, I wanted to finish the game out in one last stream. I wanted to be able to not wake up knowing I had boss fights ahead of me in a game I've never even sort of tried casually. Luckily for me, there wasn't a lot of in-between. This chapter allowing flight meant things like travel to bosses was a lot faster, a lot more convenient. The world did feel a lot more empty and less interesting as a result, while feeling bloated in terms of scale and overall unpolished, but also these bosses are weirdly easy. This one in particular basically just wants to kill Pigsy. Avoiding getting hit while waiting for cooldowns is genuinely as simple as just standing mildly away from it. There also was a deer that was a cross between Kushala Daora, just to get more Monster Hunter into an unrelated video, and also murdering my poor frame rate. Pretty design, but that's where my like of this boss ends. Until phase 2, where it got really metal. Do I like multi-phase bosses? Not really. Do I gotta respect things when they get outstandingly metal? Hell yeah, I do. I held on to a really big bug, which I more or less just needed big stats and fire resistance for. This being a quote-unquote boss, and all of this being really poorly conveyed to the player. Weird stuff. Speaking of, though, I needed to fight a bug inside of my pig-based companion. Something about it basically being just a dual sword-wielding foe made it fairly intuitive to play against. Sure, I died multiple times, as was often the case, but a lot of the combat is just so flowy. For all the problems the game has, and it does have many a minor issue, the combat more often than not just feels good. Now, importantly, those were no mere random bosses to have fought. They were very carefully selected for one simple reason. I wanted the armor and weapon you get for beating them. Also, I think they were required to proceed, and the fact that they're laid out the way they are feels really bad. Like, what if you just didn't happen to run across one of them, or go to a particular corner of the map that had an archway, and under it was a path, and up that path was another hidden path behind a waterfall? Like, it's not super hard to find, but I could see how you just wouldn't for potentially a while of searching a very barren place. But all of this is to find the best weapon that I'm going to get my hands on in general, thus unlocking the final boss. It feels like having Gwen locked behind the painted world. What happens if I just forget the doll, huh? Also, you may not like it, but this is some of the best armor as well. Behold, for I'm a primate. Wait, does that track? What are the implications of— What, you think just because this frog is more aggressive and can harden to deflect attacks it has a chance of setting itself apart from the pack? Lest we forget the damage the spider hell frog dealt? This is nothing. Most fights take forever, and this one was easy. Slow, but easy. Circling back, now with the ability to ignore elemental resistances, I fought a boss that required farming resources to fight, but also didn't communicate to the player that it costs 4 bits of ore per attempt. I'm so glad it only tells you how much it takes when you no longer have any. Also, I spent way too long the morning before stream just farming will, experience, and ore to prepare for the day ahead. Turned out I really didn't need to do the last bit because when things stop being resistant to your main damage type in addition to a massive damage increase, they also die pretty quickly. Go figure. Very similar story here, this being the end boss of the secret area of the previous chapter. It was also just struggling to deal enough damage through my new armor. My defense is now phenomenal, even if my play isn't. Its area denial is pretty huge though. Not big enough to necessitate the fire resistance item, but you know, it's fine. We spent enough time the day before practicing the fight that the rest came a lot more easily than I expected off the back of stats. We then beat up another rock, two-faced a hippo, which was just as mundane as you'd think with it being a hippo, fought a lizard that felt more at home way earlier in the game, barely eking out a one-phase fight, in spite of it doing a lot to stall for time, wasting both a lot of my monkeys and my transformation time. I went to fight what would have been a one-phase fight had it not been for the boss slightly moving, but that's okay. We got to fight a seemingly identical rock in a different part of the map right after, because why not? You know what this game could really use? More rocks. Why, I hope that there's another stone-based boss, but in an even bigger pain in the ass. More literally, even. Just an obscenely large rock should be the next fight, because that'd be great. That'd be fun. It'd be even better if it pushed you around, killed you instantly, removed your ability to fly, but kept you in an arena that makes the Elden Beast fight seem reasonable in terms of approachability on foot. I was being sarcastic. Game, I was being sarcastic. Nobody asked for this sincerely. Why would anyone want this? It keeps its weak points ages away, and what am I realistically meant to do about it? This is dreadful. Like, here. It's poorly built enough that it clipped through its hand to lose all my health instantly to it setting its foot down, which feels bad enough. Because how does one meaningfully handle avoiding something of this scale? But also it then killed me outright by picking it back up. If I was dead anyway, and you were going to clip me through the damn thing, then why not just do it in the first place? Why make me wait, game? Why does this chapter feel so unpolished? This isn't even the only rock that I was able to walk straight through in this map. Best I could find was to wait for a double ground slam and then just one cycle the damn thing. Mind you, this was not an easy one cycle. It wasn't as hard as the Ice Dragon a while back, but the opening to actually kill it was short, and failure to do so meant I was basically screwed. Weak point mechanics are a nightmare for runs like these. And you better believe I was having Neo flashbacks the whole time. But after everything we'd gone through, after all the trials and tribulations, it was time for the final boss. I'd gathered the majority of the pieces of Wukong, walked in the Monkey King's footsteps. All that was left was to beat and become such a being. A big ol' rock monkey. And you know what? I'm okay with it being a stone-based foe. And while a lot of the boss is theoretically fine, it's just not aggressive enough. So many enemies, and especially bosses, just make no effort to close distances, and I'm fine with that. It helps me a lot. But it feels like it conflicts a lot with what I think is the vision they had for this. The fact that the bosses mostly just slowly walk in my direction means I can stay back and wait. And yeah, the game isn't built for this. It's a melee game, so the real gains of doing this are minimal, but I mean, I'm clearly able and arguably incentivized to do this. It's some of the freest cheese I've seen in a while. If they don't fix this boss, then here's the easiest strat. It's not fast, but it's effective. Just wait. A lot. It does have some arena-wide AoEs that are kinda hard to see until they start being fiery in Phase 2. You can more or less just stay away, but dodge those sometimes, which I'd argue is genuinely easier in Phase 2 just based on visibility. Stone Monkey is an absolute pushover. You may think it pulling out a duplicate would monkeyfly our problems, but no, not really. The projectile they'd use are eh. Now Phase 3, that's when things picked up. The old Wukong pulls out a lot of techniques that I at least think I have access to, bouncing around, swinging a bonk stick at speeds more befitting a final boss, and if there was anything to meaningfully close distances, then we'd be in for a hell of a fight. There's a little there, but not really, and as cool as some of the moves are to see used by, well, anyone, I guess, it was conceptually a neat fight that couldn't pose a big enough risk to feel final bossy. Phase 4, though, and yes, this is Phase 4. Phase 4 is where there's genuinely a big turn. There's still the aggression issue to a degree, but it's less prevalent for the fact that when distance does get closed, because it will, even if slowly, the Great Sage's broken shell finally becomes genuinely threatening. You can and will get burst down if you don't show some respect. The boss can harden to block, perfect dodge through attacks doing pops of damage if you stick around, can even freeze you in place. Not so much a fan of the freeze in place move. It can allegedly be countered via your cloud step, but that feels bad from a mana perspective. I don't loathe it from a design perspective, but I don't like it either. But that being said, I also kinda do. Wukong as a character is, as far as I'm aware, a little scamp. A little trickster, a goof, if you will, likes to share a gaffe, and being able to fundamentally mess with your game and how you play it in the middle of doing things, that's kind of incredible characterization, and I don't think that can be overlooked. If that wasn't enough, when you drink to recover health, not sure what specifically triggers it, but the bastard can actively freeze you in place to take your gourd from you to heal himself. It's so stupid. It is so mean. It is downright anti-player and anti-fun, healing the boss while also removing player agency. And I adore it. It's one of my favorite things I've ever seen a boss do, because it absolutely spits in the face of everything I've known in gaming conventions. This shouldn't work. Not on any level. But it does. really well. I love it and what it does to characterize the stone cold and otherwise voiceless character. Despite it not really being Wukong anymore, dude steals your drink in the middle of a fight to the death, more so gives it back. You're fighting a bastard so cocky that your source of healing is placed back there by the being trying to put you in the grave. I just don't know what else can be said. That is the insight into a person that I desperately crave in games, that true cutscenes more or less never give, instead focusing on exposition, and this game stops to say, hey, this boss you're fighting? Yeah, they're an ass. Get fucked. Absolutely incredible. Bravo. But with that done, the final boss defeated, the game would finally come to an end. The first time, yeah, we ain't done here, I'm gonna see this through. While it's arguably better for my mental health to call that a victory, I wasn't satisfied with that. Welcome to the run back to the boss arena. It doesn't look that long, but trust me, it was too much. I saw it many times, it would have cost them nothing to just put the shrine closer, please! Put the shrine closer! The first half of the fight is whatever. The second half, that's where things get interesting. Let me put it this way, it's still not the most aggressive boss in the world, there's a lot of lore walking at you, but when this bastard walks, I get concerned. The second half has massive AoEs, really fast attacks, incredibly dangerous ranged attacks, and a shockingly direct response to transformations. When you transform, so does the boss. If you get hit by the transformed attack, welcome back to your monkey form. Same with the laser eyes for some reason. If they hit you, you get put back into your I can't deal damage due to rules of the run mode, and it sucked. Especially when I was really far into an attempt and didn't realize, meaning I had to restart the fight. I was more or less perpetually afraid to engage the boss in melee range. He's manageable, but threatening, in a really fun way. It's genuinely a really fun fight, very worth the 2-ish hours I put toward it. Just staying away though is not the play. He has a grab attack via a jumping spear throw that I just couldn't get the timing for, that's best to avoid by more or less hugging him, forcing you into melee range. Hope you can get back out of it. That's great design, that is fun design. It arguably punishes you regardless of how you play, but it also gives you options. There isn't just one answer to avoiding damage here. There's playstyle expression and a lot that you need to answer to. The transform attacks are fairly forgiving, but not exactly free to dodge either. I don't know, I struggled a lot, but I liked the fight. It was mostly great. I think my only major complaint is that he can just instantly clear status effects that you put on him. Pretty brutal in that regard. Phase 2 really came out and said, what if not one, but multiple gods just challenged you to a fist fight? And I think we're well past saying the transformations are anything but magic, so all I gotta know is, can you catch these hands? Make a wish, you sons of bitches, you're getting the monkey's paw! This is so beyond stupid. This is ridiculous. This is over the top. This has completely ruined any semblance of balance or tight controls. This is a flurry of nonsense of the highest order, and I am so here for it. After everything we'd gone through, this is so much stupid fun, and I loved this. Also, we got a move that buffs us elementally, which is kind of a spell, and also does damage on casts, so I spent the rest of the fight just using that, which was less fun. Except to finish it, we did need to punch a couple of fools. But anyway, the final phase was doing crazy amounts of damage, and I'll be honest, I had no interest in potentially having to restart. So the only thing I was concerned with casting was this soul unto the ether. You are nothing. Your domain is nothing. You are God in name only, in rank of being brutalized. You are but a punching bag upon the world stage, and whose decision was it to suddenly make this game so cool? Because this is so friggin' cool. I don't personally understand the sort of game that is nothing but a power trip. It feels empty to me, like, ooh, I'm always winning, yay, but even I gotta admit, after everything I dealt with, after all the hoops I had to jump through to even stand on these mountains, to be here fighting this fight, I feel like I earned it. I struggled and fought to be here, and this feels like a lovely little cherry on top. I put in a ludicrous amount of time and pain to see the true final boss, and in a magic-only run, it wouldn't let me use the Scorch Shower ability at the very end. I have no idea why, but the last thing you ever really get, the game found just one last way to screw me over, and I don't know whether I should laugh or cry. I gave this game everything, and it took from me. It took until the very last. But that still wasn't the end, not truly. I still had to beat the final boss again to get said secret ending, but this time with the Stone Monkey transformation. Finally, a transformation better than Red Tide's. So basically this whole video is to say that the first transformation you can get is arguably the best in standard playthrough. Enjoy that information, and thanks for monkeying around with me. This was a hell of experience, not a perfect game, but a very fun one. An incredibly long game if you do the side content, and so much more than I thought I was getting into. As far as I'm aware, that marks this as an all-boss run using only magic, arguably with an asterisk in there, but I can live with that. Like I said earlier, my previous record for longest run was somewhere around 50-something hours. Black Myth Wukong landed at 86.6 hours across 6 days. Of that time, I streamed for 78 hours, 14 minutes, and 34 seconds. Because my computer deleted my files, I had to go back through the full streams manually for the whole script writing process, making the longest run I've ever worked on and the longest video I've ever produced, also the slowest to put together. So, hey, maybe something quicker next time? Anything quicker? Maybe even something played casually. I don't know, I'm tired. I'm so tired. So as I put to bed a run that has taken more out of me than I ever expected, I'd like to thank my lovely channel members, as well as Twitch subscribers, for your support. If I were simply playing this on my own, I likely would have just not called it a day, moved on with my life. And in a few months, when I've recovered from this roller coaster of emotions, I'm gonna be really glad I did. I'm just gonna need a minute. Given the length and the hell that occurred to make this a reality, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed your time here. You probably know how to use social media, and I hope that means I'll get to hear your thoughts now and on future outings. Until then, remember to stay safe, spread some kindness in the world, and I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.